Have you ever noticed how stories, especially, those ancient myths, they seem to evolve, gain new life almost with each generation? What if these timeless tales are being respun, not just for fun, but maybe to tell a completely different, even revolutionary truth about our world? Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your curiosity as our guide and, well, your sources as our map. Today we're plunging into something really fascinating. It's this wave washing over the literary world, the surge of feminist retellings of mythology. We've gathered a pretty rich stack of sources here, everything from academic journals, magazine articles, even some lively online discussions, all exploring how authors today are revisiting classic narratives. They're aiming to empower, redefine, and fundamentally give voice to characters who've historically been, well, silenced or misrepresented. So our mission today is to unpack why this trend feels so powerful right now. What does it actually mean for how we understand these ancient stories? And maybe most importantly, how does it reflect and maybe even shape modern conversations, around gender, power, identity? Okay, let's dig into this.
It really is a compelling movement, isn't it? And when you start to peel back the layers of these old narratives, you quickly see that the stories we've inherited, especially the ones originally written down in, patriarchal societies, they often contain this subtle, sometimes not so subtle misogynistic thread. It's not always hitting you over the head. Sometimes it's woven so deep into the fabric you might miss it unless you look closely with the modern eye.
Yeah, and our sources really hammer this point home. They detail how female characters in these foundational myths were so often ignored, right? Pushed aside, or constantly reminded of their supposed inferior status. They weren't really complex people with their own stories. They were often just plot devices, basically there to help the male hero on his journey or make him look good.
That's perfectly shown by figures like Circe, for instance. In the traditional versions, she's often just this one-dimensional nasty sorceress. Curses Odysseus's soldiers without reason, turns them into pigs. That's kind of it. Her actions seem totally arbitrary, evil just because. No real context. Then you have Medusa, terrifying Gorgon. And in some of the most common versions, she was cursed, turned into this monster after being raped in Athena's temple. But the myth's focus, it snaps right to her monstrous punishment, not her violation. Her transformation becomes this warning, designed to scare people.
And it's not just Greek myths either, is it? Our research found similar patterns across different cultures, like Kaikeyi from Hinduism's Ramayana. She often gets painted as this evil stepmother. Why? For basically just demanding the rightful oaths promised to her by the king, which, yeah, led to Rama's exile. But her claim was legitimate, yet it's framed as pure wickedness, mainly to make other characters look more virtuous.
Exactly. This is just a few examples, but they show how widespread this pattern is. Consistently diminishing women, often leading to violation, marginalization, or just outright demonization. And what's really interesting is how this re-examination, this whole trend, isn't just happening in university literature departments or tucked away in novels.
Yeah.
It's deeply connected to the broader societal shifts happening right now. Our sources draw a really strong line between the rise of these feminist retellings and the huge conversations around women's rights, bodily autonomy, gender equality, things that are so central in 2024. It seems pretty clear that women's reading choices today are reflecting this focus. They're seeking out stories about these historically sidelined female characters, stories that resonate, that address the imbalances they see and feel.
And like you said, it's not just a popular fiction trend. It's getting serious academic attention, too. For example, the College of the Atlantic, which is a really respected liberal arts college, they actually offer a course called Epic Heroines, Feminist Retellings of Mythologies. That's not just, reading a few recent books. It digs into the history, the theory, the impact these retellings have on how we understand literature, culture.
Exactly.
That kind of academic focus, it's a clear sign this movement is significant. It's playing a vital role in critically reevaluating the whole literary canon. It signals this isn't just fleeting, it's a real intellectual and cultural force.
Right. So the purpose of these retellings goes way beyond just entertainment. It's deeply purposeful, almost revolutionary, you could say. They're providing this crucial platform for voices that were deliberately twisted or just completely ignored. Our sources put it nicely. Authors are turning these stray threads from the original lore, brief mentions, ignored suffering, one-note villains, into rich lore with proper representation. The goal is kind of multifaceted, really. It's about challenging those deep-seated patriarchal biases, yes, but also depicting modern concerns using these ancient frameworks and ultimately advocating for more just, more equal treatment for everyone in society, culture, and definitely in literature. Which brings up a question for you, listening. As you hear this, what really stands out to you about why we seem to need these new perspectives right now?
When you think about reclaiming these narratives, it's really about giving characters depth, isn't it? Agency and inner life, where before there was often just a flat sketch. It's moving past those two-dimensional roles that only serve to prop up the male story, and finally acknowledging the complexity of female experience.
Exactly. And to really dig into that, let's look at a couple of specific examples that show this reclamation in action. First up, Madeline Miller's Circe. Huge book, highly acclaimed. Now, in the traditional myths, Circe is largely, as we said, this one-dimensional sorceress, curses Odysseus' men into pigs. No clear reason why. Her actions are just presented as this give him a magical hurdle for the hero.
But Miller completely flips that, right? Gives her a voice, a whole inner world.
Oh, absolutely. Miller's Circe transforms her from that flat villain into this incredibly complex, actually quite relatable protagonist. Instead of just being evil, we see her become a villainized character. And that perception is largely built through the eyes of heroes. Heroes who are mainly focused on showing off their own strength or navigating her magic. In Miller's hands, Circe becomes layered, full of personality, deep desires, and she goes on this profound journey of self-discovery. Her story, right from birth, is marked by alienation. She's initially called Stupid Circe because she doesn't have the dazzling beauty or overwhelming power of her siblings, children of Zeus. She's an outcast, even among the gods.
That's quite heartbreaking, really. Establishes her vulnerability immediately. And her journey, as you say, it's full of disappointment, loneliness. Our sources point out how loved ones keep abandoning her. Her brother Aedes ditches her for his own gain. And Glaukos, the human fisherman, she turns into a god because she's infatuated. He forgets her the second he gets divinity and fame. Leaves her totally alone.
Yeah, it's rough.
Miller, as one source puts it so well, she wades through the mist of sexist opinions that have basically clouded Circe for centuries. She cleverly weaves the few details from the original myth with Circe's new, powerful voice. She overturns those old plot lines by adding complexity, motivation, moving way beyond just good versus evil. It's not just retelling, it's like re-understanding her whole existence.
And what's really interesting here, despite the huge success of Circe and how it's generally seen as a feminist retelling, there's been this quite lively and actually very insightful debate, especially online, in forums and book discussions, about whether it truly hits all the feminist marks. Some argue it's maybe better described as a women's retelling, because it mainly gives a female perspective rather than, say, explicitly pushing for collective female solidarity or a systemic critique.
And some of those criticisms are pretty sharp, actually. They make you pause and think about the nuances, like the fact that Circe turns another woman, Scylla, into a monster. Some critics say, well, that doesn't feel very sisterly, does it? There's also this perceived, not like other girls vibe Circe sometimes gives off, a kind of detachment from other goddesses. And this noticeable longing for male affection, or at least male company, maybe over building strong bonds with other women. Plus, some readers feel she's maybe a bit too lenient towards certain men who treat her badly beyond just, turning them into pigs when they cross the line. These points make us question what exactly qualifies as feminist in a story.
But there's a strong counter-argument in these discussions, too, suggesting a more complex reading. This view suggests Circe dislikes all the other gods, female and male, because they're cruel, obsessed with their hierarchies, petty, just tiresome, really. Her welcoming of mortals who, yes, in that culture were mostly men showing up on her island, isn't necessarily about wanting male affection itself. It can be more about their novelty, their short lives, the potential for a different, more grounded existence compared to the boring eternity of the gods. Her deepest drives in this reading are often about finding a mortal life, family, belonging, things she never had with the gods, not just about men. And besides, her decisive acts of vengeance against men who do wrong her, and her pursuit of her own interests, sometimes called predatory or self-serving, those definitely break the mold of traditional Greek women. She asserts her will, she survives alone, she punishes trespassers. Which leads to this bigger question, again for you listening. Can a character be flawed, morally gray, even seem to have traits that clash with some feminist ideals, and still be part of a feminist retelling, if the story itself examines and critiques those patriarchal structures and female agency within them? It really forces a deeper think about how we define feminist literature.
That's a huge question. It pushes us beyond just surface readings, doesn't it? Makes us grapple with character complexity versus the overall narrative critique. Okay, let's pivot to another fantastic example. Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad. Atwood's reason for writing this one is super clear. She talks about inconsistencies and unanswered questions in Homer's Odyssey. She famously said she was hunted by the hanged maids, those 12 forgotten characters whose story, as she put it, just doesn't hold water in the original. She felt compelled to give them a voice.
Such a powerful starting point for her, isn't it? That need to correct the silence. Now, in Homer's Odyssey, Penelope is mostly the ideal wife, loyalty, dedication personified. But she's a fairly minor character, mostly passive, almost always defined by Odysseus. She's either weeping for him or briefly being the witty and manipulative trickster with her weaving. Her identity is tied completely to her husband and her home.
But Atwood's Penelope? Totally different. She's speaking from Hades, centuries later, with this sharp, retrospective wit. She actively corrects her own image, points out Homer's misrepresentations, his judgmental focus on her supposed female weaknesses. Atwood's Penelope sheds those passive roles. She fights that quintessential faithful wife label. We see her gaining real authority, running Odysseus's huge estates for 20 years, challenging the idea women should only do domestic stuff. She even calls marriage a mere arrangement, where a woman is handed over like a package of meat. Wow, that just strips away all the romance.
That's incredibly stark.
And the weaving, it stops being just a trick to delay suitors. It becomes this powerful symbol of female expression and defiance, like Philomela weaving her story of rape. Penelope's weaving becomes her agency, not just her chore.
And this is where, as you said, it gets really interesting. The heart of Atwood's motivation. She masterfully gives a collective voice to those 12 hanged maids. Their perspective, completely ignored by Homer. Atwood felt Homer's version of their fate just didn't add up. These maids, born to wrong parents' slaves, peasants they were treated like objects, disposable, routinely sexually exploited by the suitors, and even, tragically, by Telemachus, Odysseus' own son. They were seen as property, no autonomy, no dignity.
And the conflict that emerges when they get their voice, it's genuinely shocking, right? It's central to the book. While Penelope, looking back from Hades, claims she couldn't save them, says she never would have hurt them, insists she was powerless. The maid's collective version, speaking as this haunting chorus from Hades, tells a much darker story.
Much darker.
They insist Penelope was partly responsible for their deaths. They accuse her of sleeping with some suitors herself, maybe for information, maybe for other reasons. And then, fearing the maids who knew her secrets would expose her complex reality, shattering her carefully maintained image of the faithful wife.
Yeah. And there's subsequent trial in Hades. It's this biting satire on patriarchal justice systems. The male judge dismisses their rape and murder as a minor incident. Why? Because he says coolly, standards of behavior were different then.
Horrifying.
He even calls their suffering unfortunate, but minor. It's a brutal illustration of how little female lives, especially poor female lives, were valued. So it becomes incredibly clear is that both Penelope and the Maid's Chorus are actively pushing back against Homer's patriarchal narrative. They refuse his story. They construct new, complicated identities for themselves, rejecting the simple roles they were given. Their competing stories demand a deep reappraisal of the societal and cultural standards that have historically limited women's voices, not just back then, but now too. It's this powerful display of competing truths demanding to be heard, forcing us to ask whose stories get told and why.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now to Medusa. She's a figure who's kind of gone beyond just retelling. She's evolved into this whole new, powerful icon. Traditionally, yeah, she's the terrifying Gorgon. Snakes for hair, gaze turns men to stone, a beastly, malevolent figure, beheaded by Perseus. The story's usually framed as a simple hero defeats monster tale.
Yes, but Medusa has gone through this truly remarkable transformation in modern culture. She's shifted from just being a monster in old myths to becoming this potent symbol of feminist empowerment, fierce resistance, unapologetic power, and the reclamation of female autonomy. Which does raise an important question for you, the listener. Is this a genuine rereading of her original myth, maybe uncovering hidden truths? Or is it more like society retroactively correcting stories that deliberately demonized powerful or difficult women? It's a key debate in understanding her modern power.
Either way, her journey to this new symbolic status is fascinating, especially when you look at her through the lens of the male gaze. Laura Mulvey, the feminist film theorist, she coined that term back in '75, didn't she?
That's right.
Describing how visual arts, especially film, are often structured for a masculine viewer, objectifying women, focusing on looks, sexuality, not their inner lives or agency. Women are there to be looked at, desired, maybe feared, but rarely as fully formed subjects themselves.
Exactly. And Medusa's power, turning men to stone with her gaze, directly, violently, subverts that male gaze. Instead of being passively looked at, she becomes the active agent of fear,
dominance. She returns the gaze lethally. Her appearance, called monstrous, well, that can be read as a patriarchal framing, a cautionary tale about the dangers of female beauty and power if it dares defy male control. Her beheading by Perseus, then, isn't just heroic. It symbolizes the brutal suppression of female power by male dominance. This feminist reading totally challenges the traditional hero narrative. Ovid's version, for example, basically treats Medusa as just a prize for Perseus, a weapon he gets to use. Her agency is erased.
And what's really compelling is how even psychoanalytic ideas, which historically were often pretty male-centric, are being repurposed now for feminist critique. Thinkers like Freud linking her severed head to castration anxiety, or Lacan seeing her gaze as encountering the real,
Right, that unfiltered truth beyond our usual perceptions.
something so raw it shatters your reality. That's the kind of power her gaze represents in that framework. It's a fundamental disruption.
Precisely. And feminist psychoanalytic approaches brilliantly take these theories and flip them. They use them to critique those traditional power structures, the objectification, the deep-seated fears around female sexuality, power, agency. It's about deconstructing how myths, even under academic analysis, can reinforce oppression. It shows the power of just reinterpreting things.
It's amazing how Medusa has just permeated contemporary culture now, become this widespread symbol. Hélène Cixous, a major figure in that French feminist theory movement, écriture féminine.
Yes, urging women to write from their own embodied experience.
She famously reinterprets Medusa. Cixous pushed for women to write for herself, put herself into the text, forge a new female language, and she says, you only have to look at the Medusa straight on to see her. And she's not deadly, she's beautiful, and she's laughing. Laughter here, it's defiance, isn't it? Liberating feminine power, freedom, shattering the fear she was supposed to create.
And Judith Butler's idea of gender performativity connects perfectly here, too. Butler argues gender isn't inherent, it's something one does. An ongoing performance shaped by social norms, actions, like different roles we play. Medusa's refusal to be just looked at, her power to petrify, becomes this powerful performative act of resistance against expectations, against roles. She confronts, immobilizes the observer, challenges binaries like beauty bugliness, power submission. She forces a rethink of what's normal or desirable.
And you see this everywhere now. Feminist art like Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, Medusa's there with other strong female figures, Audrey Fleck's sculptures showing her as powerful, complex, beautiful, not just scary. New novels like Jessie Burton's Medusa, Natalie Haynes' Stone Blind giving her a rich voice, a perspective, even high fashion. Versace uses her image as a symbol of allure, strength, timeless beauty, turning fear into desire. And maybe most importantly, in movements like #MeToo, Medusa's image comes to symbolize resilience, fierce protection, speaking out against violence, against victim blaming. She even pushes back against beauty standards, right? Representing power that isn't about pleasing looks, resisting gender binaries. It resonates with body positivity, gender identity discussions today. Strength comes in many forms.
Yes, but it is important to bring in a critical view here, too, on this widespread use of Medusa's image. Some critics argue that while these modern takes are often well-meant, they can sometimes just repurpose her image without fully tackling the deeper issues. The systemic problems of gender, power, sexuality, her original myth, maybe inadvertently highlighted. There's a risk it just becomes a trendy symbol, a commodity, rather than sparking real transformative change.
Right. Like, it's not enough to just slap a snake-haired icon on a product and call it feminism. The real work, maybe, lies in considering the intersections. Gender, race, class, sexuality. How do they factor into her story, into her symbolism? Otherwise, we might overlook how different women experience victimhood, rage, resistance in vastly different ways. Her story needs to speak to a broad range of experiences, address intersectional struggles to be truly inclusive and profound.
Moving beyond individual figures now, we get to the really profound, almost prophetic vision of Adrienne Rich, poet, essayist. She actively dedicated her life's work to creating what she called a counter-mythology, designed specifically to clash radically with patriarchal narratives. She wasn't just critiquing old myths, she was forging entirely new ones.
And what's really striking here is Rich's vision isn't just a different angle, it's a deliberate radical inversion. She talks about crushing the myth of the valiant male hero, arguing this archetype hid a darker reality, revealing men, in her view, as tyrants, rapists, irresponsible, incomplete lovers. She saw the whole patriarchal world as cold, inhuman, violent,
unlivable for women.
Strong words.
And she flips the script on the patriarchal myth of the female destroyer, figures like Pandora or Medusa blamed for evil. She transforms that into the matriarchal myth of the loving female transformer, highlighting women's capacity for nurturing, creating profound change.
So her counter-mythology vividly reimagines women not as passive victims of fate, but as active explorers, as lovers of other women, as purifiers of a tainted world, as wise, loving mothers fostering real connection. It's this powerful call for unity among all women, to establish a new mythology based on matriarchal values, not necessarily going back to some ancient society, but as a revolutionary process, aimed at balancing patriarchy's destructive impulses with continuous growth, movement, and love.
And this isn't a gentle suggestion for change, is it? Rich tackles patriarchal control head-on, especially regarding female anger. She saw anger as vital, transformative, but patriarchal myths, she argued, deny female anger, only allowing it for insane women, usually leading to their destruction.
Right.
But Rich imagines anger as this force for rebirth, a necessary catalyst for new consciousness. She writes, famously, "The sun to set on this anger, I go on head down into it." For her, facing that anger wasn't self-destructive. It was a necessary step towards liberation, towards truth.
And she really emphasizes how women have been systematically seen, for centuries, as just pure nature, exploited and raped like the earth. This deep pattern of objectification. Rich meticulously shows how patriarchy hasn't just controlled, but fundamentally stolen women's bodies and egos, dispossessed them of self, of autonomy. She looks at rape not just as a crime, but as a political act of social control, maintaining power. She also critiques how childbirth became medicalized, with the male doctor as its hero, effectively cutting women out of their own experience.
Taking away their agency in something so profoundly female.
Exactly. For Rich, that was a direct rebellion against stealing female knowledge and power.
And central to all this is tackling that male projection of destructive qualities onto women, what she chillingly called the Pandora fantasy. This pervasive idea that women are inherently the source of evil, destroying men or the social order. This fear, Rich powerfully argues, stems from a fundamental dread of the woman's body itself, a primal patriarchal fear of female power, sexuality, creation.
And this projection, combined with patriarchy's structures, inevitably isolates women. Rich talks a lot about this special woman trap, this tactic where maybe one woman gets some power or privilege, but only by being cut off from other women. And, crucially, cut off from her own real powers, which Rich believed came from collective female experience. Patriarchy doesn't just oppress, it actively isolates, causes women to self-destruct or become estranged from each other, preventing collective action.
So Rich's solution is this urgent, powerful call for connection, community. Women, she insisted, have to actively connect, build communities, create their own culture, language, spiritual values together. You can see this in her own work, right? Her shift from addressing mostly male literary circles to directly addressing women, especially in 21 Love Poems.
Absolutely. That shift is palpable.
She powerfully argued that dialogue between women and expressing love between women, platonic or romantic, was absolutely central to transforming existence, dismantling patriarchy. That's the core of her dream of a common language, isn't it?
And language itself, for Rich, was a revolutionary battleground. Patriarchal language, she argued, is like a poison, subtly making women fear their own power, keeping them passive, submissive. She called for a radical act of renaming the world. The act of writing, articulating female experience in new ways, was dangerous, yes, but freeing. A way to disenthrall oneself from patriarchal rhythms, formulas, to create something, a language, a poetry that can't be used to keep us passive, a language of freedom.
This all seems to culminate in her fascinating, deeply personal look at the mother-daughter split. She called it an essential female tragedy, a profound loss often ignored in male-centric tragedies like Lear or Oedipus.
Right, those focus on father-son or kingly issues.
She was fascinated by the lost Demeter core myth, seeing it not just as abduction, but as this symbol of a mother's immense power, grief, and ability to undo wrong, to reclaim what's lost.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rich explores this deep, often suppressed link between female biology, the unconscious, and creative power, often through the lens of lesbian eroticism. Her floating poem, Unnumbered, from 21 Love Poems, really embodies this counter-mythology. She masterfully fuses lesbian lovemaking with these vivid images of birth, the womb. Phrases like half-curled frond, traveled generous thighs, my whole face has come and come, rose-wet cave.
Incredibly evocative.
It intertwines lovemaking and rebirth, symbolizing recovering lost language, lost connections, lost power. Rich saw physical intimacy between women as directly challenging those patriarchal axioms, as essential for freeing women to create new myths honoring their experiences, their desires, to truly transform their existence. It's this powerful assertion of female autonomy, creativity, born from connection and love.
Wow. We've really covered some ground. From specific characters like Circe and Penelope getting these incredible new dimensions, to Medusa evolving from monster into this fierce symbol of power in our culture today, and then delving into Adrienne Rich's profound, really revolutionary call for a whole counter-mythology built on community, connection, a new female language.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is how these retellings aren't just about looking back, are they? They're not just nostalgia. They're actively shaping how we understand gender, power, identity right now and maybe into the future. They really show that myths aren't these static relics. They're living narratives. They keep adapting, provoking, inspiring, challenging us to constantly rethink how we see the world. They're like a mirror, reflecting our own ongoing evolution as a society.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, as you go about your day? As you encounter stories, ancient myths, new novels, films, maybe even news stories, how might you start to look for the voices that have been quieted? How might you spot the perspectives that got overlooked or deliberately left out? And where can you find that hidden power waiting to be reclaimed? In the stories themselves, or maybe in the conversations they start? Perhaps the greatest story still waiting to be told is the one you'll help shape, just by questioning the narratives all around you.